a restaurant owner in Victoria. It was amazing to see the local industry come together and share information on everything, from ordering plexiglass barriers to navigating support programs. In my own community of Coquitlam, Novo Textiles went from producing dog beds to becoming the first made-in-Canada manufacturer of N95 masks. And of course, there were countless others who checked in on neighbors, delivered supplies, or put their hands together to keep the 7 p.m. cheer alive. And it's thanks to the people of this province that we have come this far. Now, our recovery won't happen overnight, but by choosing to invest in people and building the collective resilience of our province, we will keep moving forward together. Budget 2021 protects people's health and livelihoods today while building a bridge to economic recovery and better days ahead. It starts with a strong foundation. The same principles that led our response to COVID-19 will guide our recovery. First, that healthy people, healthy communities, and a strong economy are one and the same. Second, that BC's recovery must include everyone. And third, it's more important than ever before to maintain the services that people count on. As the last year has reminded us, there is nothing more important than the health of our loved ones. And as my grandfather, my Zeta, was fond of telling people, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And while he certainly wasn't speaking about a global pandemic, it does certainly hold true. The pandemic threatens not only our health, it has completely disrupted economies right around the world, including our own. Our recovery depends on keeping people healthy and safe. Budget 2021 delivers $4 billion over the next 3 years to help keep people safe from COVID-19 today, while strengthening our health and mental health care system for tomorrow. This includes $900 million to support testing, contact tracing, personal protective equipment, and the largest vaccine rollout in BC's history. Our focus is twofold. First, to reinforce BC's healthcare system, both against the pandemic and to meet the needs of the future. Second, to make real, significant, and continued progress toward the mental health system that British Columbians deserve. For many BC seniors, staying safe meant saying goodbye to visits with family members, hugs from grandchildren, or just a trip to the post office or grocery store. And it has been incredibly difficult and lonely for so many parents and grandparents. Budget 2021 continues to protect seniors by expanding home health monitoring systems and adding more care aides to assist with daily living at home. Additionally, the Health Career Access Program will help build up a compassionate and qualified workforce in the seniors' care sector. Launched last fall, the program will recruit, train, and employ up to 3,000 people who lost their jobs in some of the hardest hit sectors. And while COVID-19 is top of mind, it is not the only demand on our healthcare system. Budget 2021 helps to address systemic racism in healthcare and make sure that Indigenous peoples have access to culturally appropriate care. Our plan also continues to tackle surgery backlogs that were made worse by the pandemic. And it helps to deliver the diagnostic services people need more quickly. We're also bringing healthcare closer to home with more urgent and primary care centers. And I'm proud to say that new hospitals are on the way for communities right across BC. And that, Mr. Speaker, includes Surrey's new hospital and cancer centre. Mr. Speaker, it hasn't only been our physical health that has suffered over the last year. The pandemic has taken a significant toll on the mental well-being of British Columbians. And it's not the only health emergency facing our province. We recently marked a somber 5 years since BC's overdose emergency was declared. And I want to recognize the thousands of people who have lost we have lost to a poison drug supply. The parents and siblings, the children and colleagues, the friends and neighbors whose lives were cut short. May their memories be for a blessing. We are taking action to help end the tragedy playing out in communities around British Columbia. Our plan meets the unprecedented need with a historic response. Budget 2021 delivers $500 million over 3 years, the largest investment in mental health and addiction services in our province's history. We are investing in our youth so that small problems don't grow larger, with more mental health supports in schools and by continuing to expand Foundry Centres, doubling the number by 2024. We are also quadrupling the number of integrated children and youth support teams to provide community-based mental health and substance use services. Through Budget 2021, we are accelerating and expanding programs put in place to respond to the overdose crisis. Our plan delivers a wide spectrum of substance use treatment and recovery services, including more funding for addictions treatment. Many of the emergency measures brought in during the pandemic to help keep people alive are now being made permanent. We are also adding new treatment and recovery beds throughout the province to support people on the path to healing and wellness. Now, Mr. Speaker, our vision for BC's recovery includes everyone. Budget 2021 enhances care for vulnerable people in our communities. Being able to stay home and stay safe is not an option for those sleeping rough on our streets, moving between shelters, or camping in parks. Budget 2021 provides places to stay for people without homes and an opportunity to connect with support services. At the same time, we continue to invest in new permanent housing for those who need it. The pandemic has been hardest on those who are already struggling to make ends meet. Budget 2021 delivers the largest ever permanent increase to income assistance and disability assistance rates. In total, Mr. Speaker, this represents a 53% increase to income assistance rates since 2017. And for the first time since it started in 1987, we are increasing the senior supplement. Soon, 80,000 low-income seniors will have a little extra money to pay their bills each month. Budget 2021 continues our work over the last 4 years to make life more affordable. Millions of families have received the BC Recovery Benefit, up to $500 for individuals and up to $1,000 for families. And I've heard from people who put the money toward healthier groceries for the month, others who are using it for perhaps a long overdue vehicle repair. And now, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 adds another way for families to save money while contributing to a cleaner future. Starting in the fall, those aged 12 and under will be able to ride transit for free. This will bring the next generation of transit users on board with the potential to save families
Very important news coming out of the legislature with the delivery of the BC budget. We'll get back to Selina Robinson as quickly as we can. But right now, we want to take you to some more breaking news out of Minneapolis, where the jury is returning with a verdict in the George Floyd case, a verdict against Derek Chauvin, who is the former Minneapolis police officer who is charged in George Floyd's death. So we'll take you now to a live shot, and we'll listen in.
R20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by jury foreperson, juror number 19. Same caption, verdict count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk. Find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts, so say you one, so say you all?
Yes.
Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer questions and to advise you further. So, all rise for the jury.
There you have it, folks. Stunning developments in Minneapolis at the trial of Derek Chauvin, charged, and now the verdict in his murder case. After the death of George Floyd, Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts: second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter. We'll be following that story and going back to Minneapolis for reaction. But right now we want to take you back to the biggest local story of the day, and that is the delivery of a big spending BC budget that is designed by the BC NDP to pull us out of the COVID morass and get our economy going again. So we want to take you back to the question and answer period now with Finance Minister Selina Robinson, who is at the podium answering questions about what she just delivered in the legislature. So let's check in there.
From Kamloops to Quesnel, Haida-Gwaii to Fernie, and Ucluelet to Surrey, we're working hard to make sure that every child in BC gets the start that they deserve. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown us all more than a few curveballs. And I want to recognize the many BC businesses that have adapted safely under difficult circumstances. In the early days of the pandemic, there was uncertainty about how its effects would be felt in different sectors and regions of our province. And now, even as we see signs of recovery, there are still businesses that need help. We are responding, Mr. Speaker, with more than $800 million in ongoing supports for businesses through this year's budget. Earlier this month, we launched relief grants for the thousands of restaurants, bars, gyms, and other local businesses that were most affected by necessary public health restrictions to battle the spring wave of the pandemic. We've also made other changes to keep the hospitality industry afloat, including making wholesale pricing on liquor permanent. Through it all, our commitment to support businesses is unwavering, and our work to try to ensure every business gets through this pandemic is ongoing. Budget 2021 continues to advance measures laid out in our Stronger BC plan, with more targeted tools to ensure a sustainable, innovative, and inclusive recovery. This includes funding for the extended small and medium-sized business grant program, along with tax rebates for businesses that increased wages or hired more people in the last few months of 2020. And BC businesses are on track to receive $500 million in PST rebates for the purchase of new machinery and equipment. We also expanded the successful Launch Online program to help over 5,000 businesses access the digital marketplace. With most of our world moving online this year, high-speed internet has been vital for reaching local, regional, and global markets. Since July 2017, we have launched high-speed internet projects in more than 500 communities. And our Stronger BC plan included record investments in connectivity infrastructure for rural and Indigenous communities. And now, Mr. Speaker, for the first time, Budget 2021 provides stable base funding that will continue to improve connectivity across the province. Expanding access to the digital economy will set up more people, more communities, and more local businesses to succeed in a post-pandemic economy. And we know that with recovery comes new opportunities, Mr. Speaker. Budget 2021 capitalizes on this by delivering $500 million to support the launch of InBC, a new strategic investment fund. This fund will help promising companies scale up, anchor talent, and keep jobs and investment at home here in British Columbia. And what's more, Mr. Speaker, it will also deliver economic, environmental, and social returns. Mr. Speaker, while we invest in the jobs of the future, we must also keep investing in the sectors that have been key to our success all along. Our tourism industry is world-renowned, but right now the people who have worked so hard, they've worked so hard to put BC on the map, they're hurting. Budget 2021 upgrades local infrastructure that tourism communities need today, like rail trails, rest stops, and airports. And it also reserves $100 million to support tourism recovery, including support for the anchor attractions that bring in visitors and create jobs. Mr. Speaker, when it's safe to open our doors again, BC will be ready to welcome the world back. Budget 2021 keeps communities strong as we fight COVID-19 while preparing our province for recovery. We are making record investments to build hospitals and schools, transit and roads that our growing province needs. But what does this mean for British Columbians? It means 15 new and upgraded hospitals from Terrace to Dawson Creek. It means 23 new urgent and primary care centres that are currently open, with more on the way. It means 146 new expanded or renovated schools that are also underway. It means thousands of new student housing beds in Kelowna and Salmon Arm, Burnaby, Victoria, Prince George, Cranbrook, and more. It means new state-of-the-art post-secondary facilities like BCIT's Health Science Building and a National Centre for Indigenous Law at UVic. And it means we are moving forward on major transportation projects like the Broadway subway in Vancouver and the Quartz Creek Bridge replacement. And today, Mr. Speaker, we are expanding our investment. In this year's plan, our infrastructure commitment is $3.5 billion higher than in Budget 2020. Mr. Speaker, this is the strongest investment in BC's history. Our plan creates more than 85,000 jobs over the next 3 years. Our plan builds schools and hospitals, healthcare centers to bring services for people closer to home. And by investing in communities across the province, our plan makes sure that everyone, no matter where they live, feels those benefits. And when we talk about recovery, we're talking about much more than dollars spent and GDP boosted. We're talking about real and meaningful ways to make life better for people now. Already, thousands of people have benefited from skills training programs launched in the fall. For example, a new project with the First Nations Technology Council will connect Indigenous participants with a career in tech. And through in-class and online training, the College of the Rockies is helping people find work as early childhood educators. Budget 2021 builds on the work underway by equipping more people with the skills needed to find a good job today. We know that British Columbians are ready to roll up their sleeves and be part of our province's recovery. I think of the thousands of hospitality and tourism workers who are supporting the vaccine rollout. Team BC needs all hands on deck. And Budget 2021 delivers with targeted opportunities for people to retrain and retool their skills. 30 new micro-credential courses will help thousands of people quickly shift direction and land jobs in high-demand fields like construction, technology, healthcare, childcare, and more. We know that the pandemic derailed many young people's plans to attend post-secondary school or training, or to find a summer job. Not only are these major life milestones, they're disruptions that could have long-term consequences for employment down the road. We owe it to young people to recreate some of the opportunities that they lost. Our Stronger BC Future Leaders program delivers almost $45 million to help create and expand employment opportunities for youth. More than 5,000 young people will land jobs, internships, and co-ops. These skills will last a lifetime, helping young British Columbians move up and move on from the pandemic. From looking after BC's awe-inspiring coastline, parks, and trails, to launching a career in tech. And in partnership with post-secondary institutions, another 3,000 students will benefit from new work integrated learning placements. Mr. Speaker, our commitment to reconciliation guides our work as a government every single day. From investing in language revitalization with Indigenous peoples, to the historic commitment to share as much as $3 billion with First Nations over 25 years. Reconciliation is an active and ongoing process, and Mr. Speaker, it will form the foundation of an equitable and inclusive recovery. Through our Recovery Plan and Budget 2021, we are working side by side with Indigenous communities and organizations to expand skills training programs. Thousands of Indigenous people will be able to get back into the workforce faster and contribute to recovery efforts across the province. We are also adding 400 more culturally based childcare spaces through the Aboriginal Head Start program. These no-fee spaces are run by Indigenous communities for Indigenous children to help give kids the best possible start. Meaningful reconciliation means following through on our commitments. Budget 2021 provides dependable funding to support First Nations engagement, stewardship, negotiations, and economic development. It also adds new resources to support the implementation of reconciliation agreements and the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 may be the greatest challenge of our generation, but our action on climate change will shape the world for generations to come. Our CleanBC plan will help us reach a more sustainable economic future on the other side of the pandemic. It is North America's most progressive plan to reduce carbon pollution while creating good new jobs. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 brings the total for CleanBC to nearly $2.2 billion over 5 years. This year's budget expands clean transportation, builds more energy-efficient buildings, and works with industries to reduce their carbon footprint. And Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 will keep us at the cutting edge with a new Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy. We all have a role to play in achieving a greener future. Budget 2021 makes it easier for people to choose cleaner transportation options while saving money. As of tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, new purchasers of e-bikes will no longer pay PST. This means $7 million in savings per year for British Columbians. And, Mr. Speaker, electric vehicles are also selling in record numbers here in British Columbia. As of last count, there were more than 54,000 electric vehicles on our roads, the highest rate of sales in North America. We are building on the momentum by helping more people go electric, expanding the charging network, and electrifying more school buses and ferries. We're also continuing to support other emerging opportunities like mass timber technology. Mass timber is good for forestry communities, Mr. Speaker, because it adds value to timber rather than relying on volume alone. It is good for the environment because it is sourced from sustainably managed forests that have a lower carbon footprint. In short, Mr. Speaker, it is good for British Columbia. Forests are the lungs of our province, capturing and storing carbon. We can't take them for granted. Thousands of tree planters set out last year, despite the pandemic, to replant forests, including those affected by wildfires and pine beetle. The result was an astonishing 300 million seedlings planted, with another 300 million planned for this year. Our province has great natural wealth, and that goes far beyond our forests. As we tackle climate change and invest in our clean tech future, we know that our mining sector will play an important role. It provides the metals and minerals that will be used here and around the world to create green technologies, from electric vehicles to wind turbines. Our province's natural beauty is also a great source of wealth, one that we have all come to rely on as we turn to the great outdoors to recharge in a COVID-safe way. Budget 2021 enhances people's access to nature by expanding and improving campgrounds and trails. And starting next year, Mr. Speaker, we will be adding up to 100 new campsites throughout the province every single year. Our plan views BC's recovery as an opportunity to accelerate environmental protection and sustainability. The successes we are seeing through CleanBC show how protecting our environment is good for people and it's good for the economy. This is true today as we continue our fight against COVID-19, and it will be true once we put the virus behind us. Mr. Speaker, we have all been through such a great deal. And I'm sure every single one of us can point to a moment in the last year when our world just turned upside down. Whether it was the closure of schools and offices or the international borders, or with the introduction of new ideas like social distancing, safe bubbles. For me, Mr. Speaker, it was a familiar feeling because I experienced a moment like this when my own world changed after a sudden cancer diagnosis 15 years ago. I remember feeling overwhelmed by the uncertainty that lay ahead for me and my family, a feeling that I think we all understand far too well after this last year. And a turning point came when I realized that my family and I were not in our fight alone. This realization came about thanks to an unexpected hero in my life, my neighbor across the street. After a particularly difficult day, she arrived on my doorstep to check on me. And she brought with her a homemade tiramisu. It was a small gesture of support, but it meant the world to me because I knew it meant that she had my back. And I knew that my family could depend on our community to lift us up when we needed them. And I want every British Columbian to feel the same way. I want them to know that we have their backs, no matter what. We are there for them. There are challenges ahead, but I am confident that by drawing on our shared resilience, we will get through these challenges together. Time and time again, British Columbians have proven that we care for one another, we care for our communities, and we care for the province that we call home. The pandemic will end, but our work to build a better future will not. To all of those listening, BC is coming back stronger than ever. Budget 2021 gives us the tools we need to build a bridge to the better days ahead, and I look forward to crossing it together.
That was BC's Finance Minister Selina Robinson tabling the 2021 provincial budget, a promise of better days ahead. Let's take a look at some of the highlights right now. The province committing $3.25 billion to COVID-19 recovery. Also, $900 million has been earmarked for health care. That money is going to go towards COVID-19 testing, contact tracing, more of the vaccine rollout. There also will be faster access to surgeries and diagnostic testing and more mental health supports in schools as well. There were several announcements made this afternoon benefiting families and seniors, including free public transit for children under the age of 12, a doubling of the number of $10 a day childcare spaces, and for the first time, a boost in the seniors supplement as well. The budget also has a focus on economic recovery, of course, and investment will be made in infrastructure, helping, according to the government, to create 85,000 jobs. $120 million will go toward the hard-hit tourism industry. $506 million will be put toward lowering emissions through CleanBC investments. If you were in the market for an e-bike, there's some very good news for you in this budget. You'll no longer have to pay PST if you buy an e-bike. All right, Richard Zussman joins us live from Victoria. That's one of the many highlights in this. Obviously, Richard, lots of things stand out, and there's a lot to unpack. Let's take a look, first of all, at BC's economic big picture after this delivery from the Finance Minister.
Yeah, and often when you look at these budgets, Chris, you also look at what's missing. So there's no sick day program provincially. There's no immediate support for the restaurant and tourism sector that will be hurt by the circuit breaker that we're experiencing right now, right up through the May long weekend. So it's important to note those things that are not in the budget. That renter's rebate that's means tested that was promised in the last election, that's not in here either. But the economic picture clearly is a major part of this document. It's actually rosier than people anticipated. So let's have a look at some of those financial numbers the province is forecasting. Yes, there will be deficits, but they won't be as large as people expected. So 2021-22, the deficit is projected to be $9.7 billion. The next year, down to $5.5 billion. The year after that, $4.3 billion. The province's goal is to get back in the black 7 to 9 years from now as the economy bounces back post-COVID. The other important thing to note is that last year's deficit was actually $8.1 billion rather than the projected $13.6 billion. And a big part of that is the fact that we had record-breaking housing sale numbers in parts of the year as we rebounded out of COVID. That meant an increase in the property transfer taxes. So the province actually collected more money than expected and spent slightly less than expected. And that meant our economic picture is slightly better than expected, Chris.
Talk a little bit, if you can, about the mental health and addictions funding. Obviously, a big part of this is designed to strengthen the overall health of people in BC. $900 million, as we mentioned earlier, to help with COVID testing and the purchase of PPE and so on, but also a big investment in the mental health of people and in addictions treatment and funding.
Yeah, so let's go through some of that addictions funding now. And clearly this is to address the other health crisis we're going through in British Columbia, the ongoing overdose crisis that we've now passed 5 years in terms of a provincial state of a health emergency. And that includes this new funding, as you mentioned, $500 million in total, $330 million over the fiscal plan, so the next 3 years, to provide a full spectrum of substance use treatment and recovery services, $97 million for mental health funding for schools and foundry centers, and $61 million expanding eating disorder care and better access to suicide prevention services. So this is part of a larger picture in terms of mental health supports. We'd heard the BC Greens calling on the province to roll mental health supports into MSP. It's not something the province is doing yet, but this is a step towards that. More support where it is lacking in terms of providing mental health support. So that was a focus. The province created this standalone ministry on mental health and addiction back in 2017 and are starting to implement some of those programs that they have been building towards over the last few years.
All right, stand by, Richard. We'll get back to you and check in for some more highlights, but we've got a great panel of guests today. And I know that they've been watching intently too. Former NDP MLA Mo Sahota joins us. BC Green Party Executive Director Joanna Campbell is with us. And, Yonina Campbell, I got that wrong. I'm reading it wrong on this, but Yonina, great to see you again. And Caroline Elliott, former BC Liberals political advisor. Let's start with you, Mo. What did you think about the budget delivered here by Selina Robinson?
Well, what the budget is trying to do is balance the public health, the mental health, and the economic health of the citizens of the province and the province itself by offering supports to people and our institutions so that we can get through the pandemic. So it's very much a pandemic budget that tries to strike that balance. It makes significant investments in healthcare, $900 million just on matters related to vaccines and PPE. It makes significant investments in housing, over the $2 billion to help people be able to get into affordable housing. It makes significant investments for businesses, notably our tourism sector, that have suffered, and also addresses our challenges in terms of climate change by making over a $500 million investment in CleanBC. So it sets the stage for our recovery while providing supports for people right now.
Lots of spending, though, Mo, and is it going to be possible to spend our way out of the economic dip that we're in caused by the pandemic? That's one of the criticisms on the NDP. They like to spend their way out of trouble, and is that what we're seeing here?
Well, you know, when you're dealing with that problem, you've got three choices. You can either cut programs, which we're not going to, you can increase taxes, which we're not going to, or you can grow the economy, which is what we're doing. In fact, if you take a look at it, this budget is indicating that our GDP has already increased significantly over the fact that over this last year, in 11 of the last 11 months in a row, we've actually created jobs. We've recaptured over 100% of the jobs that we lost in the pandemic. And we've made investments that lay the foundation for further recovery going forward. So the trick of it here is to grow the economy by making investments in innovation and technology, offering supports to our traditional industries like film and forestry, so as to make sure that then people have the skills necessary to be able to fill the jobs that are required post-pandemic. So this is not much different than what the federal government proposed yesterday. We're part of a nation. We all see that the economy is recovering, and we see that there's substantial growth for Canada and for British Columbia if we invest in innovation and technology.
All right, I know our other guests are going to have some views on what we've just heard from Finance Minister Selina Robinson. Let's check in with Yonina Campbell. Yonina, BC Green Party Executive Director, some of the things you saw in this document and in the budget, are these things that you would have agreed to if there was still an agreement with the NDP, and do you see some shortcomings? What do you agree with, and what do you think is missing from this?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a lot of things in here that I think people will hear on an individual basis. You know, campgrounds, free bike transit for kids under 12. So there's a lot of those small things that people will individually identify with. I think the thing is I look at when I look at this budget is that this pandemic has disproportionately impacted people. We have a long way to go. A lot of the things that the government rolled out during the pandemic were difficult for, in particular, small businesses in the tourism sector to access. So when you see these kinds of announcements, I just question whether that's new money or if that's money from those things that were previously promised. I also want to know whether or not that's actually going to be something that'll stimulate the economy in a way that we're going to need to do in order to bring down the deficit. And the other one I think that, we were really hoping to see, and you mentioned it in the intro, is to really start looking at mental health as a health issue and to make it available under MSP. I think that those are welcome announcements to be investing in mental health in schools. I'd like more details on what that looks like, how that's going to roll out, and whether that's direct support to students, and whether there'll be more psychologists and school counselors hired. And additionally, just we have a lot of people, we call it the shadow pandemic that's coming in terms of needing access to mental health supports. And really, the BC Psychologists Association asks for $16 million in a billions of dollar budget in healthcare to test this pilot program and having psychologists in doctor's office. It's a miss. And finally, I would just conclude that I think the real thing here that we need to be looking at is whether these solutions are really going to spur a green recovery and really address our climate goals that we need to see moving forward. But overall, I think that there's lots of good stuff here, but there are definitely some things that we need to see a more holistic plan.
All right. Yeah, the no PST on e-bikes, although that is a great way to get people out of their cars, there needs to be much more, and I'm sure you'd like to see much more in the details about what kind of a green economy this budget will inspire. Caroline Elliott, also a member of our panel, and she, of course, former BC Liberals political advisor. Caroline, what's your reaction, and is there enough that you've seen to push back on what the NDP have shown us today?
Well, I wasn't surprised at all to see a lot of spending. I think the NDP are a little bit famous for that, and it can be okay. I mean, we're in sort of desperate times, and it calls for desperate measures. So you know, a high level of spending isn't in itself something really to scoff at. But my concern comes up from the NDP's plans to pay for it. Mo talked about there being three ways: raising taxes, cutting programs, or economic growth. But he missed the one that they're actually doing, which is kicking the can down the road in the form of deficits and ultimately debt that our kids and grandkids are going to pay for. They don't have any plan that I can see. In fact, they said they'll defer it to next year to start talking about how they're going to pay for some of this stuff. In the meantime, that's just going to keep adding up. That's going to be something that future generations pay for. I think it's fundamentally unfair to shift that burden down the road. So I would have liked to see a whole lot more from them on that front. On the other things he touched on, I mean, cutting programs, they did actually, I believe, cut some of the money from the Jobs and Economic Recovery Ministry, which I think is absolutely shocking. And I hope I'm not wrong, but I believe I saw that cross my desk at some point today. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, that would be obviously a terrible time to do that. But he also talked about raising taxes. I mean, it's true that it doesn't lend itself to affordability, but the NDP have shown in their time in office that they've raised or increased 23 different taxes for British Columbians across the board. So anyway, it's an interesting approach. I'm really disappointed to see very little attention on how those things get paid for. And I'm not convinced that the spending that they are announcing is going to be leading to actually better outcomes. Take infrastructure as a case in point. I mean, everything they've touched in terms of infrastructure has gone wildly over budget, whether it's the doubling of the Site C dam costs, whether it's the Petula Bridge being kicked down the road another year. You know, they have a terrible record when it comes to infrastructure investment. So greater dollars does not mean more kilometers of road. It does not mean more hospital beds. With the NDP, it often just means more money for less infrastructure. So it's concerning.
The devil is in the details for sure, and we'll go through the fine print and make sure we can confirm which programs do, in fact, get more money and which programs were cut. Although, as we heard the minister say, they are doing their very best. In fact, it was one of their three core principles to maintain services. Let's bring in Keith Baldry right now, who's watching things and obviously has gone over this thing with as much of a fine-tooth comb as you can in only a couple of hours. Keith, it's good to have you with us. Let's talk about some of that capital spending, some big promises here from the NDP government.
Yeah, $40 billion over 3 years, not chump change here, folks. So the Broadway subway shows up for the first time in the budget. More than $365 million has already been spent on that, which struck me as a bit of a surprise because since we don't have shovels in the ground. But I've learned during the lockup that about almost $200 million was spent on property acquisition. So capital is always a big part of the government's overall fiscal recovery plan. It's stimulus spending. You've got more schools coming on board. BC Hydro continues to refurbish and spend gargantuan amounts of money on maintenance. But the bottom line, what goes with capital spending, Chris, it does get added to the debt. And so it's interesting to see our debt now skyrocket, about to hit taxpayer-supported debt, $92 billion at the end of this 3-year fiscal plan, about $71 billion going into it. Because it costs money to build roads, bridges, tunnels, and such. And the Broadway subway line is going to be probably the most expensive one, but also no money in here yet for the Massey Tunnel replacement project. That's going to be at least a couple $1 billion added on top of this. So programs and services are one thing, bricks and mortar are another. This government has a very ambitious capital plan, as the BC Liberals did beforehand. Everybody likes to see new roads and bridges and hospitals and schools and such, and that's always a big theme of any budget, but it takes on added importance in this one because it's seen as economic stimulus to get us out of this hole that we had dug so far, so deep last year.
Well, I don't want to give them a free pass for spending all the money, and I'm sure nobody does, but did they even have an alternative with considering the year that we've had, the hit to the economy, the number of sectors that have taken a beating? Did they have to come out with a spend-heavy budget, are they going to be criticized, or are people going to sort of understand, look, desperate times do call for desperate measures, as one of our panelists pointed out?
Well, not a single government that I'm aware of is anywhere close to balancing its budget at any level, whether it's municipal, provincial, or, well, at the end of the tunnel for a long time on that front. So I think any talk of balancing the budget is just pointless. The question was, how big was that deficit going to be? One can argue in this current environment, you can even spend more money to help people who probably need more help right now than they ever have at any point in their lives. I mean, so many people have recovered economically from the devastation last year, but there's still many, many people out of work compared to normal times. And there's many sectors suffering tremendously. The tourism sector in particular, there's another $100 million there. It's not defined exactly how that's going to go. They were looking for $650 million. Not saying they should get that amount, but governments now find themselves in a very unusual situation, which no one is expecting fiscal discipline to be practiced here. It's just a question of how big is that deficit going to be? If you're going to go in for $5 billion, I remember running into Carol James, the former finance minister, more than a year ago when we started to descend into this pandemic and we knew her budget was blowing up. And we talked about how her deficit could be $5 billion. And I said, well, if you're in for 5, why don't you go in for 10? You know, spend the money on areas that really desperately need it in an attempt to keep the economy alive. That's what governments do in recessions and depressions to varying degrees. And that's what we're seeing governments do right now. It's just a question of how much of that deficit it's going to be.
Right. And is it going to be effective to pull the number of struggling businesses up out of their desperate times? Nobody knows more about the struggle of BC business than our next guest here, Bridget Anderson, President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Bridget, you know well the struggle of businesses, big and small, in this province. What did you see in the budget that is going to help them, if anything?
Well, Chris, we're calling this a pandemic prudent budget. And as you know, we have a report card that we fill out, and there were 3 categories this year. Economic recovery, which we gave a B, fiscal sustainability, which we gave a B, and then competitiveness, which we gave a C+. So overall, our grade this year is a B-. And we do applaud the government for the investments in healthcare, for the new funding in tourism and the arts, for the funding around reskilling workers. And we certainly were glad to see those measures that were announced in Stronger BC last fall continue to support business. But where there was an opportunity here for the government was on that long-term economic vision. You know, what is going to set us up for this for recovery in the long term to ensure that we are competitive globally post-pandemic. We didn't see that vision, and we're certainly concerned about the $3 billion in unallocated funds, and we want to know from the government what they plan to do with that.
What, just in terms of the C grade, which, look, if I was in high school math, I probably would have been happy with a C, but that's not what we're talking about right now. What did you see there that was missing that led to the lowest grade out of those 3 criteria?
Well, clearly we're talking about competitiveness. And so one area that we've been talking to the government about for a long time is around some of the needed measures on finance, on tax and regulatory reform, and we didn't see that. We're talking about conditions that make it easier for business to operate, to attract investment to our region. And certainly we didn't see that in this budget. But again, you know, we did see a lot of the immediate measures that are needed to get us through where we are in this 3rd wave. What we would also like to see is what is that long-term vision that will set our region up for success. So when we look at competitiveness, you know, we have seen a lot of taxes that have increased for businesses over the years, whether it's the health tax. You know, we do have some of the largest tax rates, particularly when we're talking about the personal tax rate, and we're one of the highest in the OECD, and that talks about recruiting and attracting talent to our region. So those are some measures that we have been advocating for a long time, and an opportunity for the government when it does lay out a longer term vision for our region.
Yeah, it is absolutely true that whatever the government can do to improve the bottom line for businesses, it's prudent to do when we're in the middle of a pandemic, and COVID has made the struggle so real for people across all sectors. I did notice a bit of a mention for mass timber, and you see the prices of lumber and wood products are going up. Is there anything in here to give you some hope for for the forest sector, the timber industry. Did any of that look good?
Well, clearly, our jurisdiction is doing better than many other jurisdictions. And part of the reason for that is our diversified economy. And in fact, the budget did speak about LNG and the importance of those revenues for our province. So our natural resources are very important and will continue to be the backbone of our region. Where we would also like to see more mention would be around investments in innovation. And as we're seeing from the pandemic, that businesses had to pivot very quickly, and jurisdictions around the world are investing in digital and other innovations that will really set them up for success post-pandemic. And so that's one area that we think the government could have delivered on in this budget.
All right, Bridge, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. We'll go back to our panel for a moment, just maybe to get a reaction from some of the things that Bridget Anderson said there. And I'll start once again with Mo. She talks about the competitive advantage and how there really wasn't anything that stood out for her that really gives BC a competitive advantage for companies who are looking to invest, nothing that would make BC stand out to them. What do you think of that criticism, Mo, and what can the NDP do to better attract businesses to invest in BC?
Right. So it's a good question. And with respect, let me say this to Bridget, because she seems to have forgotten that just about a month ago, Microsoft announced that it was going to create 500 new jobs in downtown Vancouver. And just about 3 weeks ago, a biotech company announced it was going to create 1,000 new jobs in the Lower Mainland. And why is that happening? It's happening because we are indeed competitive on many fronts. We're making investments in innovation, and we're making investments in post-secondary training, and we're making investments in technology. That gives us a real competitive advantage to other jurisdictions, let alone our quality of life in this area. In this budget, to make us even more competitive, we're taking additional steps. We're investing $500 million in a new Invest BC program, which the business community has been asking for to begin to continue our good work that we're doing, both in innovation, technology, film production, which she didn't mention, and television production, which are taking off in this province. That's over and above the $500 million that we're investing in energy transition to help us move to a cleaner climate and to be able to be the global center for environmental excellence in terms of technology. She didn't mention the fact that in terms of agricultural technology, the government, in its both in its budget and in its throne speech, created a concierge to attract some of the major agri-tech investments in the world here to British Columbia. So there's a lot that we're doing there on that side of it to remain competitive. And final point is this, is that we're also doing and making investments in infrastructure, making investments in subways and in airports. And connectivity is absolutely essential to attracting investment, and making sure we provide proper and adequate childcare and affordable housing are also integral to be able to, for a company to be able to make that ultimate decision to invest in BC. No other province in the country has created jobs every month for the last consecutive months. The reason why we in British Columbia have seen our deficit go down from a projected $13.1 billion down to $8.1 billion is because, strangely enough, through the pandemic, our economy actually has been doing better than any other province in the country.
BC has been more reluctant than most other provinces to go into a full economic shutdown like we have seen in some of the other more populous provinces in Quebec and Ontario.
Chris, that's because a healthy population and a healthy economy go hand in hand. As Bonnie Henry does her job, then Ravi Kahlon and John Horgan can do their job on the economic side. And so far, touch wood, we've been doing really well on that front.
And the devil is in the details, and we'll learn more about exactly where some of this money will be spent. I want to bring Green Party Executive Director Ionina Campbell back in. What is the one specific area, if there is one, or maybe a couple, where you'd want to see some more details about exactly how this big spend is going to be allocated?
Well, I think I would point out a couple. And, we are talking about long-term sustainability. And I think that this budget really lacks that boldness that's going to take us to a sustainable, fair, and equitable future for everyone. The pandemic has disproportionately affected racialized, minoritized groups, women.
Women too, right? Yeah.
We talk about the SHE recovery. There's just not enough in this budget on childcare. The federal announcement hopefully will be making up for the lack of investment that the NDP is making in this budget on childcare. But the other one I want to point out, and Mo was talking about, how well the economy is doing. A lot of the job growth here has been in part-time jobs, and it really has benefited from a hot housing market. And the government has a challenge here, is that if the housing market continues to do what it's doing, it keeps keeping people out of the market, that the social policies need to do to adjust to make sure that people have access to a rental and affordable homes, the missing middle and things like that. So the challenge here is that on the one hand, the housing market really generates a lot of revenue for the province. On the other hand, it really keeps people from having access to affordable, available rental and homes. And I guess I just would finish off with saying that the one point here is, and it is that opportunity for us to position ourselves as an economic leader, as a green leader, with a very bold, ambitious green recovery plan. And I think that that's a real asset for us moving forward, and we're going to continue to push for that.
All right, Caroline Elliott, as a former BC Liberals political advisor, you say you were still advising the Liberals right now. What do you see in here? How would you advise them to tackle a response to this budget? Obviously, they're going to need to find a leader in the next year or two here, but how would you advise them going forward, having seen this budget, to win over the BC population?
Well, I think the first thing I would ask is what the NDP's plan is, because it's certainly not clear from this budget what their plan is for economic recovery in the private sector jobs, not public sector jobs that cost the public money, but private sector jobs that actually generate revenue for the province so that we can actually afford these programs going forward. And I think that's what's really lacking. And to confirm the point I made in my previous comments, the Jobs and Economic Recovery Ministry funding is down $15 million from last year. It's down at a time when we actually need to be investing in in these sorts of things. I think what it tells me is that it's just not really a priority. They want to announce a lot of big ticket items. They want to talk about a lot of big ticket items, but when it comes to delivering, they're not actually doing it. You want to actually create an environment that attracts investment, that brings jobs to British Columbia, that gets those contracts for local businesses, that gets people working again. Instead of creating jobs in part-time sectors and in the public sector, as the NDP are doing now, we want to see more of those private sector jobs emerging. There's more people paying taxes, there's more businesses paying taxes, and ultimately that means more revenues to go around so that we're not leaving our kids to pay for the spending that's happening today. So that's probably the angle that I would work at it from, and it's not that hard an angle, I think, to sell. People understand. They manage their household budgets in much the same way. They think, do I want to leave my kids better off than I am today, or do I want to leave them worse off? And when people think about that, they know what their decision would be. The NDP is not running government like that. It's problematic. It's really concerning for me as a parent. And I think that's the way I would tackle the budget from a BC Liberal perspective.
All right. Certainly aligns with what we heard from the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, too, and the business community. Thank you very much, Carolyn. Yonina, Mo, I appreciate you always chatting about politics, and in this case, the budget. We appreciate your expertise. We'll check in just before we sign off at the top of the hour here with Richard Zussman in Victoria again for some final thoughts on what we heard from Selina Robinson, the Finance Minister, today.
Yeah, so clearly this budget very different, Chris, than anything we've seen before because of the COVID lens being applied to it. So some of those traditional measures we look at a budget around deficits and surpluses and debt are sort of thrown out the window as everyone's looking for help. And, families in British Columbia are clearly looking for help now. Many people have lost work due to the pandemic, and there's some help in here for British Columbia families. Let's have a look at two of the big items in there, and we've heard this throughout and through the budget. This free transit for those 12 and under will be provided across the province. This mainly targeted towards sort of middle, lower class families to ride public transit, and then 3,800 new childcare spaces added to the $10 a day childcare program. This is one of those signature promises from the NDP. They need federal support for this as well, which they got in a big way yesterday. So this is sort of pushing towards the next step as the province tries to fulfill that promise of $10 a day childcare. But obviously this budget is all about COVID and immediate supports, and families will sort of work their way through as they try to figure out which of these programs work for them.
All right, thank you very much, Richard. Yeah, we appreciate the coverage. We know we're putting more coverage together throughout the afternoon and into the news hour and 5 o'clock news as well. So yes, a big spend here in the provincial budget from Finance Minister Selina Robinson, and we are going to be talking about the deficit and the debt as well as we take a closer look at the fine print in this and get some more details over the coming days and weeks. Much more coverage coming up here on BC One. We appreciate you joining us as always.